Hey guys. So the town of Wallkill continues to have some controversy, and Neil is here to talk about it with us today. I have been out of the loop a little bit because I was away for a couple of days. But before we get started, please make sure you're subscribed to the channel, like, share, and click that bell so you get notified when new videos drop and when we go live every Tuesday at 8 p.m. All right, folks, let's get into it. Da-da,
And
da-da,
that bell.
da-da-da-da.
So every time you hear that bell, remember to go click and subscribe so that you hear us. All right.
There we go.
So Town of Wallkill back in the news again. With some dumb controversy,
Dumb
right?
controversy. Is there any other
And I
kind?
call it I call it dumb because it's listen, ask questions. I'm always about asking questions. I think there are a lot of statements that were made during Thursday night's board meeting that were false and very misleading. So let's talk about it. Let's get into it. All right. The first thing that created the controversy, right, was a resolution, okay, by the town board.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the resolution by the town board. Okay. And basically what the resolution is it's they are borrowing or utilizing Parkland money, right, for a parks and recreation project. And this is basically a loan, a reimbursement. So when we talk about loans between funds, okay, so let me take a step back. This is something I've actually talked about numerous times on this podcast, right? The opposition here, the Republicans in town would be wise to actually listen
They're
to
not gonna do
to
that.
what we are saying. All right. There are different funds within a municipality. Okay.
Okay.
Your parks and recreation are not maintained within your parkland fund, despite what this board, or not this board, but previous boards have tried to explain to people. And that's the frustrating part about this, right? Is the fact that there's a lot of misleading information. Your parkland fund is basically a trust. Okay.
Okay.
It was a trust that was set up back in 2014. Okay. It wasn't set up by any board member. It was set up by statutory law, right? By New York State.
Okay.
Okay. So, if you want to think about it, there was a law, right, within New York State. Okay. And I'm going to put it up here. All right. You know, basically, it's a trust fund. And what it is as your municipality is developing projects. Okay. So
Okay.
this could be a residential project or a commercial project or whatever type of project it is. Okay. Um what it is that the development project, usually residential, a lot of times residential, they have to have some type of recreation or parkland. They have to have designated property that's set aside for utilization of some type of park. Now, a lot of properties don't want to build a park, right? They may not want to build a park. They may not want to have a park within their community.
Right.
Okay. So the planning board has the ability, if they aren't going to set up a park or some type of recreation, they have the ability to donate money to the town, give money to the town, okay, as what we call a parkland fee.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. So they pay a fee to the town, right, for parkland. In other words, it's in lieu of, right? In lieu of, right? In other words, you are doing something in exchange for something
Something
else. In other
else.
words, you are not doing the park, so you have to provide the town with money. Okay. That money is set aside in a trust. Okay. It's not touched. There's no expenses that go up against it. It's literally just a trust that's set aside for the It could be used for capital projects. It's for improvement and maintenance of your parks
Got
and
it.
recreation. Okay. That's all it is, right? And I really just wanna make that clear because I really think that the board doesn't understand this as well, and I think that it's important to go through it. Now I'm gonna play you the video in its entirety, right, from the other night, and the reason that I'm gonna play you the video in its entirety from the other night is, I wanna discuss afterwards what was said at the meeting, and we can kinda go through and dismantle, essentially, what is trying to be said. So let me just share that now, and we'll go through that.
Okay.
Okay. Public comment? Yep, Mr. Carr.
Hi, Ralph Carr, 167 Live Oak Road. One, I'm sorry Frank's not here because I wanted to tell him thank you for going to a second board meeting, public meeting per month and doing your voting in public. I think it's great. It encourages, I think, people to get more involved, to know more what's going on. I can't tell you over the years that I've heard things like these budget resolutions, and I wanted to ask questions. So I thank you. So
Just I want to point out,
Wow.
right, it's a big deal. The supervisor went to 2 meetings per month. Okay, so public open meeting laws state clearly, right, if the board is going to vote on a resolution, right, that members of the public have the ability to come and speak about those resolutions.
Nice.
For years, right, under the Republicans, this has not been allowed. Okay, they have continuously gone out of their way to do things in a private manner, right behind closed doors at work sessions. Okay, so that the public could not see what was going on, had no ability to ask questions. They would put agendas up after the meeting had already started. It was absolutely insane, right? How they would operate,
Yeah.
right? And they weren't following the law. I pointed it out numerous times and nobody gave a shit, right? Nobody gave a shit, and that was sort of the thing. But it's good from a public standpoint that now the town of Wallkill has decided that they are, the transparency aspect. They're going to have these public meetings and they're going to do them twice a month. And this is where they're going to vote, which is
Let,
great.
let me
Good for
stop you
them.
right there. So what you're saying here is that a political candidate or political official, right, an elected official, made a campaign promise, and they're following through with it.
Yes.
Imagine
Yes.
that.
And what's interesting is Ralph Carr is sitting here praising this.
Yes.
And he ran for supervisor last year
Against
and
Frank.
did it against Frank and said he wasn't going to do this. Right? Like, I mean, like that was pretty clear that he was going to keep things status quo, So it's very interesting that he's praising on the one hand, right, his political opponent from the last election, right, in doing something that he was unwilling to do himself.
That's interesting. Was it really him, or was it collectively all of them together making that decision?
Collectively, all of them together
Yeah.
to make that decision.
I just want to point something out, and I don't know if my mouse will show up. Who is that? He looks familiar.
Who's what?
In the back, last row on the right side.
Oh yeah, that's Eric
That is
Valentin. We're
Eric.
going to hear him later.
Got
Yes,
it.
we're going to
Okay.
hear him later. Okay.
Should be
Let me
interesting.
continue now.
Okay.
Yes. Let me continue.
my question is, regarding the Parkland, and I'm sorry, I left my copy of the resolution, the Parkland fees. I know 50,000 is going to just like a bridge loan.
Go to the general fund.
Well, what about the amount, is that being expensed to the Parkland fee that goes to the Harold Card property? Is that an expense to the Parkland? I wasn't sure how that worked.
I believe that's actually a loan that's going to be paid back.
Okay, because and I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me because there were different transactions in the resolution that seemed to go back and forth, 4 different ones. And one that I was just curious about was the appropriated fund balance. I didn't know how that had anything to do with whether it's a loan or an expense. But that's my question. I'm glad I can ask it. I'd appreciate if someone give me an answer if you don't have it now. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Think, Ralph, that there is, it's a loan, right? I don't know.
This is
if
Mark
it's-
Coyne talking.
I spoke to Steve. Yeah, I don't know if it's legal to do that way. We're not supposed to spend Parkland money on anything other than capital projects in the park, like when we buy playground equipment, monuments for the Memorial Park, that type of thing. So my question would be, and it's a loan. So it's gonna go back, but at the same time, I don't think it's legal to do it that way.
I can,
Please,
Please defer.
yeah.
This is the town attorney.
It is legal. The Parkland money is not like it's not a protected fund in the sense that some other like certain highway funds, for instance, can't be touched like by law. Once they can be moved around in highway, but they can't be taken out of highway without going through some hoops. It is going to be repaid. There is a signed contract with DASNY so that money is essentially guaranteed. Now, I would not substitute my judgment for yours on whether you feel like that is a wise thing to do or whether you want to do it, but you can do it. So that's.
And is this predicated on a grant?
Yeah, there's already a grant that's
Already
been
awarded.
awarded, and there's a contract that's been signed by the town and the state. And my understanding also is, first of all, my understanding is that Michelle ran this by the controller's office. And I think I've been advised that this Parkland fund is actually a line item in the general fund. So it's not like it's being moved from some legally protected sacrosanct set of funds. But again, I don't, whether you think that's a prudent thing to do is up to the board. I mean, that's why it's on for a vote.
I don't mind the actual, borrowing from this fund balance to take care of this. We do that all the time with grant money, right? You gotta spend it to get it, right?
Right, exactly.
I've always been under the impression that line is protected. Kind of like water and sewer, right? You can't take from water and sewer and put it in fund balance, you know what I mean?
I know, I do.
General fund,
Yeah.
so I don't know.
And I think that in the 11 years sitting here, Parkland fees are restricted fees for capital improvements to our parks. And in terms of capital improvement, it's something material. It can't be used for operating expenses. You can't buy grass seed, you can't buy mulch. And we've been through that before because we went over that and it wasn't able to be done. And again, it is a restricted fund, much like, water and sewer can only cover water and sewer stuff. So, I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong, Joe. I'm just saying for 11 years, we haven't operated that way. So I'm not sure what's correct. I mean, in my mind, if I was told that by previous council for 11 years, I think I'd want a little more homework before I voted on that, because I wouldn't be comfortable with it.
The board has to decide what it wants to do.
Yeah, I'm
And
just
I'll be
saying,
happy to,
I'm not,
yeah.
it's always been a restricted fund, like you couldn't use it. We were trying to buy additional property along Wallkill to make a park, right? And I asked the previous council, can we use Parkland fees to cover the difference in cost? Because there was going to be a change in what we originally agreed to. He said, absolutely not. It's not a park. It can't be used for that. So, I mean, maybe because this is a loan, maybe it's kind of a different thing. I don't know. But I'm just, I'm not really comfortable knowing without some more information, I guess. You know, because I saw it today. Would have been nice, we talked about it at a work session a couple of times and we could have hashed this stuff out. It would be the first time we're in public bringing it up, but be that as it may.
Can I? Since I finally get to talk on this thing. So I understand what you guys are saying about the, and I have less problem with the loan. You say it's legal. I have more of a concern about paying for the added expenses at the Howard Card property out of. I don't know why we would have to even lend $5,000 to, and the accounting that's described in the resolution. There are 4 different things. It's very hard to follow where it's coming, but when I see that appropriated fund balance is involved, it just makes me wonder, what's that? Why is that involved? If it's not involved in the 50,000, but it's involved in the 5,000. So I just think you should know what's happening there.
All right.
Before this goes any further, I'd like actually motion to have this tabled for further discussion.
I would second that.
Awesome.
Okay, why don't we talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, we'll talk about this for a second, and then we'll go back to hearing Mr. Valentin to speak. So, very interesting stuff, right? You know, it's
Is it legal? Is it not legal? You know, it's
first of all the things to unpack right there. Okay, for 8 years, I served on this board, and this is the bullshit that I heard. Right? Is you had, right, Eric Valentin, you had Mark Coyne, you had Eric Johnson. They talk about legality. They don't understand what's legal. Okay. And the attorney is sitting there saying, no, it's legal. And they're just like, well, I don't believe that's the case. Right. You're arguing with your attorney.
the
right?
attorney who understands the law and I'm sure has researched this and understands what you can and cannot do.
But here's the even worse part. They talk about being on the board for 11 years and they still don't understand their funds, the accounting, or anything. And Ralph, who claimed, oh, I'm a finance guy, I understand this stuff, right, clearly shows a lack of understanding with relation to what is happening. And this goes to what I saw for 10 years, right, and how the accounting was done. So let me just clarify.
Yeah, let's clarify that.
Your Parkland fund is a trust. You don't expense anything. There's nothing in your Parkland fund other than money. If you want to spend some of that money that's in that trust, it is not a restricted fund in the sense that, you're right, it's not your highway, your water that are specific purpose funds. This is a trust fund, okay? You basically keep money in it that's given to the town, and it's specifically for parks and recreation. That is it. That is all that it can be spent on, and it has to be spent on for improvement of parks and recreation. Okay? So that's what it is. Harold Card's property, Harold Card, great guy, right? Donated property to the town to the parks. Okay? It is now a park. If you want to maintain that property, it is absolutely permissible to use Parkland Fund to help maintain that property or to do whatever you want with that property, right? They could have used money from Parkland to fulfill the contract that they had, right? That they failed to adhere to. Okay, I mean, they're in breach of that contract out there.
And
I mean, George didn't do anything that he was supposed to with that contract when the property was donated.
Okay, so just clarify what was in that contract just for our audience so they fully understand.
So Harold Card donated his property, I want to say maybe like 5 years ago.
Okay, how much property did he donate? Do you know?
It was about, I want to say about 20 acres
of
property. Over on Van Burenville Road. He donated his property in exchange for the donation. Now, he donated the property free and clear. In exchange, he got to live on the property, You got to continue living on the property. The town would maintain the property. Town did not pay any cost for the property. However, the town was required, in accordance with the contract, to build a barn for him because he is an artist and he wanted to create a historical center
Really?
of the town, right? So that was supposed to be a historical landmark for the town where the town would be able to put pictures and other, items from the town's past, and people could go visit it like a museum, and the town was going to build a barn, right, as part of that museum aspect of it.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay.
And that was the only thing in the contract that it stipulated. And George, Valentin, Coyne, and Johnson refused to spend any money on it. They wanted the property because they didn't want it developed, and then they chose to breach the contract and not actually fulfill the obligations of the contract. And that's been going on now for the better part of 5 years.
And Card never got his barn.
Never got his barn, no.
And they never maintained the property or mowed or did anything?
They did the mowing, and the Parks and Rec guys did a great job in mowing and maintaining the property, but there were a lot of things that needed to be done and fixed up on the property that, that just were kind of put off, right? It was like, oh, we'll do this later type of thing. And apparently this year, right, energy prices are going up.
Yes.
And I guess the board members from last year, George being the supervisor, as we've seen throughout the budget, didn't budget enough money to pay utility bills, right? So now they have to find the money. And here we are. Like, I mean, we just heard we had to borrow money to make payroll in January.
Yes.
Right. And so this idea that we're kind of piecing this together as we go, okay, just shows you how bad the budget was last year. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. Go online, go check out the budget. It's literally one column. All you can see is the current budget items. And how did they formulate those budget items? They looked at last year's budget, which was based on the prior year's budget. There are no actual numbers. So as costs continued to rise, they never adjusted their budget.
Right. They just put the items in with nothing, with no amounts.
Right.
We'll just
right.
We'll just deal with it, whatever. And that you can't do that.
Right. And that's how they dealt with everything was we'll just make budget amendments next year and we'll figure it out as the year goes on.
Just kicking the can down the road.
And now what we see is a supervisor who is actually trying to fix things and make it whole and do the right thing and not wait till the end of the year just to balance everything out. Right. And make sure that lines aren't being overspent because he knows that he's going to end up in a budget crunch at the end of the year. So he's trying to fix that. Basically, what happens is when you receive a grant. Okay, so they received a grant from DASNY, which is, one of the New York State that gives out a lot of money. And basically you need to, those are like spend first grants,
Okay.
so you got to spend the money first and then they reimburse you after you've spent the money.
Okay.
So basically the town doesn't have any fund balance, right? I mean, we've already determined that the town has spent all its money. So where do you find that money? Well, basically what they're doing is they're going to borrow money from the Parkland fund, the trust, right? And then they're going to repay the trust later. Okay. Now, basically there are rules that govern loans between funds. You can make a loan between your highway fund and your general fund and your general fund and the highway fund and your water funds to other water funds and all that kind of stuff. You can create loans, but when loans get paid back, they have to be paid back with interest.
Okay.
Okay. So this idea that you can't loan money and blah, 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 bullshit, right? Not only that, Parkland as a trust, when you spend money out of Parkland, your Parks and Rec fund are in your general fund. So all expenses go through your general fund for Parks and Rec. So if you wanted to do a capital project, or you wanted to do a project, okay, utilizing Parkland fund, you would have to transfer the money to your general fund, okay,
Okay.
right, in order to be able to spend it. Because
Okay.
Parkland fund is a trust. It's not an operating fund. You
Right.
see what I'm saying? So you
Yeah.
have to transfer it anyway. Okay. Now, what Mr. Carr said about appropriated fund balance, and there were a lot of journal entries. Okay. Here's a little education for those people who don't understand accounting. And I'm sorry that accounting is so fucking complicated. I really am. I didn't make this shit up. I didn't develop accounting. All right. I will say this. It is National Accountants Week in the United States. This week is National Accountants Week. Go out and thank your accountant for knowing this shit. All right? And doing this shit right. Because it is tough. It is complicated. So what we see, what we have to do on the accountant side is what's called dual entry. Okay? Because you are dealing with two separate funds.
Okay.
Okay, you have to make entries in both funds. The fund that's receiving the money and the
one
fund that's giving the money.
That makes sense.
Right.
So there's
So he says there was a lot of back and forth. The back and forth is essentially the dual entry. Right? It's the Parkland fund giving the money, and it's the general fund accepting the money.
anybody who's ever balanced a checking account, you do that. You write a check, you take money out, you put a deposit, you put money in. Maybe you got to cover a check, you wrote too much on the check, you're overdrawn, you
Right.
put extra money in. Either way, each time you put in or you take out, you're making an entry. In this case, you're just making an entry in I guess that sounds like two books, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because you have two different books.
You have two
The
different books.
Parkland fund has its own set of books, and you have your general fund, which has its own set of books. So
Oh.
you have to make them on both sides.
So when you're transferring funds from one checking account to your savings account and back and forth, you get two general entries. You can do it online and you can see it on both sides. Does that kind of simplify that?
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
So
Carry on.
So it for me, like I look at that and I'm like, dude, you were on the board for 4 fucking years. All right. And it just showed and you know, and these guys were on the board for 11 years and they don't know this stuff. And it like kills me because these are the arguments that I had for 8 years. Okay. These were the stupid arguments that I had for 8 years because there's a lot of gaslighting just in the statements that they made.
Yeah.
So Councilman Johnson saying, I wanted to buy property with Parkland funds. Parkland funds are not for buying property. They are for your Parks and Rec department, and they are for the improvement, right, and maintenance of your parks and recreation. That's it. What he is talking about is in purchasing property is what they call a land protection fund or a land trust fund, where the town of Chester recently got this. Basically, you can set up a fund that will tax residents and collect money, right, for the purchase of property that's currently not in use and not for parks and recreation, but for preservation. Okay.
Okay, like a watershed or a green area.
Yeah. It's called the preservation fund. Sorry. You know, I just had a momentary lapse. It's called the preservation fund. Okay. A land preservation fund. And the town of Wallkill doesn't have one. Right.
That's interesting.
But Johnson keeps referring to it. Listen, the state has to grant it. Again, this is another thing that's the state has to grant. It has to be approved by the state. The town has never asked for one. Now, if Johnson had wanted one, okay, he should have actually made an effort to try to get one approved by the state so the town could have one and then go out and buy property, okay, that he wants to go out and buy. Parkland fund can't be used for buying property, okay? End of story. And that has nothing to do with parks and recreation. His conflating of the two shows you how they're gaslighting you.
Got it.
well, I couldn't spend it on what I wanted to spend it on, so you can't spend it on this, right? And we heard the same thing with with Councilman Coyne, okay, and the truck. So he has a trailer, right, that had been used, all right, by the Wall Memorial Committee, okay, for events and stuff like that. He wanted the town to buy it. He wanted to utilize Parkland funds to buy it. That isn't what Parkland funds are for. They just aren't.
Right.
They're for your parks and recreation. They're not to buy vehicles, right, or trailers, okay, from councilmen. Not only that, there's a conflict of interest there because you're buying from a councilman.
Good point.
Right?
Yes.
So there are issues here. There are real issues here. And what these guys are doing are trying to conflate a lot of different things together that just aren't true and aren't reality. Okay. So again, here are the facts. They have a DASNY grant. DASNY grant is a spend first grant and get reimbursed later. Okay. They're going to loan the money to the general fund to pay the expense. Okay. And then when they get the grant money back, they're going to reimburse the Parkland fund, right? The trust. Okay. Perfectly legal. And they could do it. There is absolutely no issue with that at all, right? New York State Comptroller's Office says that that's legal. The town attorney says it's legal. Me as a comptroller, yes, that's legal. Okay. Right. You can do that. That is absolutely permissible. Spending the money to for Harold Card's property is considered Parkland, so you can absolutely put the money there, right? Because that's that's part of Parks and Rec. So we can talk a lot about a lot of different things here, okay? But I just really wanted to make that clear to people that what you're being told, right, is basically trying to make the current board look bad, right, and the current supervisor look bad for no reason, okay? But it's also the idea that these people have done this for years.
So they've done it themselves. Or
they've tried to manipulate the narrative around finances to only get what they want.
Yeah.
Right. And not allow anybody else to do things for the benefit of the town. Okay. And that's really disingenuous of them.
Yeah, well, that's really what it's been over and above everything. And as we've gone through this whole journey, is pointing to the fact that there is an aggressive, there's an aggressive move here by the right to really prevent Frank and his team from getting to the heart of the financial issues in this town. And so they do it with ridiculous BS AI slop and gaslighting, flat out lying, telling you, the stories are unbelievable. But the bottom line is it is to distract from the fact that we have real financial issues. There are real problems here that go back years, and that they've continued to kick the can. They've never addressed it, or they been doing stuff. That's really what I it boils down to. Maybe there's something there to be dug up. You know what I'm saying?
There is so much here. And again, it's the gaslighting. It's the idea of trying to make it sound like something is nefarious or wrong or not being done, when in fact
it's finally being done right.
It's finally being done right. Like, because we heard Councilman Johnson say, well, for 11 years, this is what I was told. You were told that because that was the narrative you and your team wanted to put out. I mean, that's what it came down to. They wanted to put out this narrative that Parkland Fund could only be used for capital projects in our park.
But the answer to that, instead of like, well, I was told this for 11 years by the other people who were there for years before me, who were there by the other people who were there years before them, who were just doing the same routine over and over and over and over again. And nobody opened up a book of all the policies and procedures to see exactly how this stuff works. And we see this
Well,
all the
and
time.
And that's what happened was I actually did open the book. I actually did take the classes and I understood that we were doing it wrong. Now, and again, for 11 years, we've been doing it wrong, but you had 5 guys saying, no, he's wrong. We're right. And the community and it was really tough to overcome that when it came to this community because people believe what they're being told, right? Because they think that all of a sudden you're in elected office, you know everything. And we see this at all levels of government, and it's just not true. It's just not true. There are experts out there. I'm not saying I'm one of them, but there are experts out there who can clearly tell you exactly what the rules are.
Because they actually looked them up.
But what you have is you have exactly what Councilman Coyne did. Okay? Where he dismissed the attorney, and Councilman Johnson did the same thing, dismissed the attorney, saying, well, we've done it differently.
That
Okay,
doesn't
well,
mean
you did it.
Doesn't mean you
Right.
did it right. Doesn't mean you did it correctly.
Right.
Just because you
Right.
did it differently doesn't mean it's the correct way. You have a legal professional who's looked this stuff up and is telling you what's
Right.
legal and what isn't. That's the reason why I have
And-
a lawyer.
And not for nothing, the quoting the previous town attorney said that monthly reporting by the town board, right, was not required. Right? Remember that. Back in 2017, when I asked for monthly reports, he specifically said at a town board meeting, right, at a work session, to all of us that monthly reporting was not required. Right? And I am here to tell you 100%. All you need to do is open up your blue town law handbook, and it clearly states monthly reporting is required by law. Okay? So your town attorney was giving information based on what the supervisor had asked him to tell the board. Okay? And that was a reality that we dealt with. That's why when I kept bringing up all the issues related to the accounting, the town attorney would knock me down and say, well, that isn't the law. And then it turned out, after we had after Frank got into office the first time in 2021, the town did a risk assessment with O'Connor Davies. O'Connor Davies came in and they said, you have no controls. Gave us 13 points of where we had risk, okay, in the town of loss, okay? And all of a sudden, the town attorney turns around and he said, well, I don't know anything about accounting, but maybe we should ask the CPA on the board. Okay.
Oh, that would be you.
Right? That actually happened until the rest of the board was like, yeah, we don't want to listen to that guy. Make it go away. And then all of a sudden it turned around again. Like all of a sudden he kept saying, well, you can't do that. You can't do that. The comptroller, the comptroller's job responsibilities are only those that are given to them by the town board.
Right.
Okay. So this idea that the town, and Councilman Johnson even stated at one point in time that the comptroller of the town sat above the town board. Right? That they were an authority above the town board, which is not true. That was a lie. Again, more gaslighting by people who are trying to manipulate the situation and others. So we need to be very, very careful when we talk about finances and money, because what you're hearing is not correct. Now, unless you have any other questions, I would like to finish the video.
Yeah.
With, so we could see the rest of the video, and I can talk about that as well.
Yeah, let's.
Mr. Valentine.
Hello, gentlemen.
Eric Valentine, you know who I am, Breakfast Drive. Just to just give you some institutional knowledge on this subject. So I was part of, if not the one that created that capital improvement line fund, because we were collecting funds from builders, the developer, and putting it just in general fund. That is a restricted fund. It was created as a restricted fund specifically for capital improvements to our parks. If you go across the country, I was always told, look at different municipalities, different towns and cities, look at their parks and you see where they spend their money, how they care for their towns. And that was the intent. The intent was to get this money and make sure that it's spent specifically for capital improvements to our parks, not to pay utility bills, not to pay for grants. I haven't seen the resolution and whether it's written that it's going to be paid, but technically, I think it's illegal to borrow money from a restricted fund with the intent of paying it back. As you said, or Steve said, you can't do that with the water and sewer fund. So that's the history behind that. It was created as a restricted fund. It was intended to specifically be used for capital improvements to our parks. We have quite a number of parks that always need improvement. And so, you know, we've stopped people from using it to buy trucks, to buy other things that are not considered capital improvements, but it's definitely not intended to be used for utility bills or for grants. So I would ask that you look for somewhere else to pay for those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
But we just kind of covered that, right? He's again, you know, he's challenging an attorney who just clearly said, you know, who checked the law and said it is legal. And he's just doubling down on what Ralph is saying.
So I want to point this out to you. All right. Simple Google search will tell you, right? So Mr. Valentin likes to say he's the one that created the Parkland Fund. So let's just look at this. New York State Law 277 and Village Law 7-730, right? Section 7-730
to 730.
Right. Planning boards can require developers to set aside parkland in subdivisions. If adequate land cannot be dedicated, developers pay a fee, dedicated recreation trust fund, which must be used, right? Hold on. Must be used, right? Which must be used exclusively for neighborhood parks and playgrounds.
Right.
That's it. That's your Parkland Fund, right? And it was created by statutory law. It was not created by Eric Valentin, right? He may have been on the. So this was actually done back in 2014, right? Eric Valentin might have been on the board when the state came out with this law,
but
but he wasn't the one behind the law.
Yeah, he wasn't in the state legislature.
The state came up with the law. Right. They said, listen, we want to stress parks and recreation in local communities, especially towns and villages. So you have the ability, your planning board will have the ability to collect fees from developers related to parks and recreation and place it into this trust fund. It is not a restricted fund. It is only restricted to its use as it has to be related to parks and recreation. That is it. That is the only restriction. It doesn't say capital improvements, you know, and generally speaking, you'd want it to be capital improvements. You don't want operating costs going through your Parkland Fund because then it'll be depleted and you won't have it. But for the most part, anything parks and rec related, this can be used for your trust fund, your Parkland trust fund. Right.
So
you hear a lot. Everything was gaslighting. It was just all a bunch of gaslighting lies.
That's what it always is these days. And it's funny because we see this type of gaslighting and sort of double talk wording all the way up the chain in government. We see it happens every single day now. That we have to sort of bounce back and forth. And so, when it happens up at the federal level and even at the state level, it makes it easier for it to happen at the local level. Most of your residents don't even see it happening. they just assume that who's ever saying what to them must be telling them the truth. And the fact is, just as Neil did right here, just by a quick Google on the law, was able to answer that question. And you had two former board members come up and challenge a lawyer who has the law in front of him and clarified it for everybody there and still
So-
challenge them.
So the way the law is written, you cannot transfer money from your specialty funds, your water districts, your sewer districts, your highway fund to your general fund. When I say transfer, that means money free and clear.
Right.
In other words, you're just giving money to another fund
From one account to
for
another.
use for right. You cannot do that. You can make whatever loans the fuck you want, as long as those loans follow the rules. Okay, and the rules are actually very clear when you grant a loan. The loan has to be paid back within 1 year. And if you are loaning money between one tax base to another tax base. So in other words, if it is not the same tax base, then you have to pay interest. So like your water and sewer funds, you would have to pay interest because your water funds, there are different tax bases for different water funds. Same with your sewer funds because there are different tax bases. Your highway fund, though, you wouldn't need to charge interest if you donated money from your highway fund to your general fund because of the fact that it's the same tax base.
Okay.
All right. I'm not saying you would loan the money that way, but I'm just saying that that's generally the way the rules are written. And what you have is you have a bastardizing of these rules and gaslighting people by people who say that they're qualified, but aren't.
But clearly aren't. Yeah. You
Right.
don't understand
they-
what the provisions are
Right.
and what the laws are. Gee.
Because they've been in office for so long, everybody just assumes, well, you've been here for, 11 years or you've been here for 25 years. You must know what you're doing. Listen, that is the worst evaluation that you could possibly do. Just because somebody's been in a job for a long time, does that mean that they know their job or they understand their job?
We're finding that out, especially I understand these are elected officials. Valentin, for the most part, was almost the entire time that he was on the board, was a councilman who is supposed to, which is they only show up for their work sessions and for town board meetings. They're not actually involved in as much administration as a supervisor, right?
But he was the finance liaison for about 20 of those years.
What is a finance liaison?
So in other words, he was the liaison between the finance department and the board. So he regularly met with the finance department and had a hand in setting up the way the finances were done in town or not done. I mean, now we know that the work was never done.
Right.
And that was part of the problem is that the work wasn't getting done. And he was partly responsible for that because he failed to provide oversight as a liaison.
Wow.
He failed to understand that bank recs weren't being done. He didn't review bank recs. He didn't do anything, and he really tried to inhibit the ability to actually fix the problem when it was uncovered. Like we were given a risk assessment, and what did they come out and do? Johnson, Coyne, and Valentin, right after the risk assessment. Oh, we fixed all those problems. That was what they said. We fixed all those problems. And then money was stolen. Oh, but we fixed all those problems. How many fucking times did we hear we fixed the problem and it just wasn't fixed? Right?
All the time. They're
you're
still,
just
they're
getting
still singing that.
gaslit.
Yeah, they're still singing that
Right.
song. Now the new team that's basically been handpicked by the same people, same former board members, are singing the same song, And so you
Right.
have to wonder, and we have real financial problems. You have to really wonder, what are they bringing to the table that's any different than what the past board members who clearly don't know what their job was and didn't want to look into how that works. You're the only one who did, into how that works. What makes you think that any of these people are going to do the same thing when they're claiming the same gaslighting? They're doing the same
Well,
gaslighting.
well, it's also funny because there was a published report, I want to say last summer, right, of the draft report of the New York State Comptroller's Office was published. It was published on my Facebook page. It was published on a bunch of other Facebook pages. People can go read it. What was interesting is if you look at that, so we heard about loans between funds and how money can't be transferred between funds.
Right.
You heard Councilman Coyne say that. You heard Councilman Johnson say that, and you even heard and
Valentin.
partly Councilman Valentin said that. Former Councilman Valentin said that, right? But if you read that report, what you will find is that the town had loans between all those different types of funds that went back years. No interest, no accounting
Oh,
for it, no repayment, nothing. That's part of why we're in this mess to begin with, was that money was being paid on behalf of other funds and creating these loans, but then those loans were never repaid. No interest was nobody even knows what, like, you have to, like, right now, one of the things that has to be reconciled are the loans that are going back and forth so that they can now
wow.
move the money, because you have 10 years worth of loans that never got settled. So you have 3 people up there talking about how this is illegal, but what they did was not illegal. Meanwhile, what they did was significantly more egregious. Here, what you have is you have a resolution, you have documentation of the loan, and you have that the loan is going to be repaid
Right.
at a certain date when this money is received. None of that was done in the past. There was no documentation of loans between funds. There was no documentation. In fact, what they will tell you today is that none of that shit existed, that I'm just lying and making it up. But I've seen the balance sheet, okay? I've seen the balance sheet. They refuse to release it, but I've seen it. There are loans everywhere
Oh, God.
between every fund, none of which have been settled. Years, these loans were outstanding.
Wow.
So, like, it's mind-boggling that you have people who are so egregiously guilty of manipulation and gaslighting that they're going to go out there and say it was okay for us to do it illegally, but we don't want you to do it legally.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. I was just going to say that, okay for them, not okay for us, and especially when we're doing it the right way, where there will be documentation, where there will be backup, where there will be a plan to pay that money back. None of which happened when they did it.
No. I used to get word about these loans, and I used to say something like, what's going on here? And I was told, oh, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. We know what we're doing.
Panic.
Right? Like that's right. That was the shit. Or, don't believe that. That's a lie, and that's not happening. But the auditors were telling me this. The accountants were telling me this. So I knew that it was happening. You could see they refused to give me a balance sheet, but now that I got them, I'm now seeing, like, this was all out there, and it was out there for years, and it was never reconciled.
Nice.
So, again, it's really hard to believe people that just refuse to be honest about anything.
Yeah.
That just refuse to be honest and don't understand, like, basic governmental concepts. You have a teacher on the board who doesn't understand basic governmental concepts, who sits there and lies and gaslights and talks about laws. You have another board member that talks about laws, and he clearly never asked the town attorney, and they keep blaming the old town attorney. Well, the old town attorney was telling you what you wanted to hear.
Yeah. Now the new one is
And-
telling you the truth, telling you how it's written.
And now you're actually getting advice. Now, granted, I think the new town attorney was spot on. He was like, yeah, it's legal to do this. Whether you should or not, that's kind of a business decision up to you. And that's where I was always trying to get to, was let's get everything right, and then we can make business decisions. But that's not what they wanted. They didn't want to make informed business decisions. They just wanted to make the decisions that they chose. And
Right.
that's what that's what you have here is they don't like the transparency, because now you're seeing partly the right way to do things. Okay. And they feel like, well, we're going to win again, and we want to go back to doing it the wrong way.
Right. And just, just to sort of bring this up, because we're actually coming up on an hour here, believe it or not. To summarize, one of the things Frank promised was more transparency. So you're getting a spill the tea casual meeting where you can come in and get an update. You're getting not one, but 2 town board meetings a month, and open voting on everything that the board is voting on. And not doing any backroom voting in work sessions, which you weren't supposed to do in the first place. So he's following through on promises that he made, and he's relying on a town attorney, one that clearly is far more competent and not in the back pocket of the board, who's giving real legal advice here. And from the other side, you're getting the status quo. Just the same, nothing to see here. That's not right. Just let us do, even though we were doing it and weren't doing it the right way. That's the summary here. That's the biggest summary here, is this is being done out in the open, in a public forum where the public can speak. Even they got to speak, and they don't like it. And it just speaks to the real in-depth and heart of the problems that we have with our financial picture here in the town of Wallkill, and we really need to keep digging. That's right.
And the one part, I'm not even going to say it, but I really, we're coming up on an hour, and I really just wanted to kind of get that across, that being informed, understanding how your government works, like basic, civics, like we all got to get there. Like this is how your politicians are manipulating you.
There
is
it
by trying to tell you things that aren't true. Your Parkland fund is just a trust fund. There are no assets in your Parkland fund other than money. That's it. And things don't get expensed through the Parkland fund. It's not an operating fund.
Right.
Okay. So you want money out of the Parkland fund, the board has to approve it, and then it has to be transferred to your general fund in order to be spent, right? If you didn't budget, and just one more comment, if you didn't budget out of your Parkland fund to spend that money, then you have to appropriate the money in your Parkland fund in order to be able to transfer it. That's the appropriate way to do it. Okay. So just little tidbit so that people understand the dual-sided accounting. I understand, like, people think it's one government. It is not one government. You are operating probably a dozen or more businesses within your government.
Right.
All right. And each one of those businesses have to be maintained separately, which means that you're going to have journal entries that are dual journal entries, which I know is really complicated. And trust me, when I first got into governmental accounting, I'm going to tell you, it was not easy to always remember that. That I will tell you right now, firsthand, right, that it becomes really clear when you miss an entry.
Yes.
It becomes really fucking clear when you miss an entry.
Nice.
Because then all of a sudden, nothing balances.
Nothing balances. Yeah.
Right. Nothing balances. Right.
There you go. Back to your own checking account, folks.
Right. So what they did was they did the right thing. They tried to do the right thing. It got tabled. I'm sure at the next meeting, the resolution will come up again and it'll pass, because they'll have 3 board members to pass it.
There you go. All right, folks. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them below. We always love to hear from you. And as always, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Click that bell. You want to get notified. You want to see us on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. live on this channel here. All right, guys. We love you. Be safe. Take care.
Peace out.